What if the financial crisis everyone is so worried about has already been scheduled? What if the banking panic of 2023, the inflation wave of 2022, and the liquidity crunch building throughout 2024 weren't isolated events, but rehearsals? Rehearsals for something bigger. Rehearsals for something coordinated. Let me ask you something. If the global economy is really as chaotic and unpredictable as they claim, then why do the same bankers, yes, the same ones, always end up on top? Why does every collapse end with the wealth gap widening? Why do the same institutions always get a bailout? And why does the burden always land on the average person, the worker, the saver, the retiree? Tonight, you're going to see something the mainstream financial media will never show you. A leak, a roadmap, a playbook. A 2024 global banking strategy document that allegedly circulated among senior risk officers at several megabanks. And it outlines a plan so precise, so coordinated, that it changes everything we thought we knew about economic emergencies. And before we go deeper, pause for a moment. Where are you watching this from? Let me know in the comments. Because people from over 40 countries watch these breakdowns. And this one might be the most important international warning I've ever done. If you're new here, consider subscribing. Not for motivation, not for entertainment, but for the unfiltered truth that no traditional financial channel will touch. Now, let's begin. To understand the 2024 playbook, we need to go back. Not to 2008, not even to 1971. We need to return to 1944, to the Bretton Woods Conference, where 44 nations gathered to rebuild the global economy after World War II. On paper, it was a meeting of cooperation. In reality, it was a consolidation of power around the US dollar. America had the gold, America had the industrial base, and America had the leverage. The world didn't choose the dollar. It was cornered into it. Sound familiar? Countries were told, if you want stability, peg your currency to ours. And if your economy falls, we'll rescue you on our terms. That was the birth of modern monetary dependency. Fast forward to 1965. Europe was rebuilding. Gold reserves were shrinking. Confidence was collapsing. What did the US do? It closed the gold window in 1971. Nixon's famous move. The dollar was no longer backed by gold, but the world still depended on it. Sound familiar? Every crisis became an opportunity to expand dollar dominance. Every collapse forced more nations into reliance on US credit structures, US payment rails, US banks. But here's where things get interesting. In 2007, just before the global financial crisis, central bankers quietly created a system that almost nobody outside the financial world understands: the Central Bank Liquidity Swap Network. Think of it as a secret emergency tunnel connecting the Federal Reserve with a handful of powerful central banks: the European Central Bank, the Bank of Japan, the Bank of England, the Swiss National Bank, and a few others. Most people think 2008 was saved by bailouts. Banks saved banks. Politicians saved the economy. Narrators tell you that strong leadership stabilized the global system. But that's not what the internal records show. The crash was prevented because of a mechanism that moved over $4.5 trillion in quiet overnight liquidity to foreign banks. Money that didn't require congressional approval. Money that wasn't debated publicly. Money that bypassed all democratic oversight. Sound familiar? We saw it again in 2020 when the world locked down. Markets didn't collapse because governments stepped in. They survived because swap lines pumped emergency dollars across the world at a speed no public agency could match. And now, as we move through 2024, the signs are identical. Banks aren't failing publicly yet. Currencies aren't collapsing yet. Bond markets aren't screaming yet. But behind the scenes, swap lines have been warming up again. And here's the part they daren't want you to know. Every time swap lines expand, a new wave of control follows. The dependency grows. the leverage deepens. And the institutions that plug into the dollar pipeline become strategically beholden to the ones controlling the valves. This is where the 2024 playbook begins. And no, this isn't a theory. This has happened before, multiple times. And every time, the cycle ends with fewer independent banks, more centralized oversight, more global coordination, and less national sovereignty. If that pattern feels familiar, that's because it is. But the 2024 version is different, because this time, the plan is bigger, tighter, faster. And according to the leaked document, it has a name. The internal document, the one circulated in late 2023 and early 2024. To the new strategy by a chilling code name, Coordinated Stabilization and Consolidation Protocol. At first glance, that sounds harmless, technical, almost boring. But buried on page 17 is the line that changed everything for me. Liquidity flows must be concentrated into compliant nodes to ensure systemic preservation. Compliant nodes, not stable banks, not trustworthy institutions, not solvent lenders. Compliant, meaning obedient, meaning cooperative, meaning aligned with the centralizing agenda. The document describes a three-phase process. Phase 1. Identify vulnerable but systemically useful institutions. Phase 2. Allow stress events to create market justification. Phase 3. Deploy swap-based liquidity selectively to guide consolidation. In simpler terms, they know which banks will fail. They're waiting for the right moment. They will save only the banks that play along, and the rest, they become collateral damage, absorbed, liquidated, or sacrificed to maintain the illusion of market forces. But the most disturbing part, the document lists by name the global institutions expected to coordinate the consolidation, not governments, not elected leaders. Banks, banks with histories of misconduct, banks with trillions in exposure, banks with notorious influence in global financial policy, and one bank in particular stands out. A name so deeply woven into every major crisis of the 21st century that once you hear it, you'll understand everything. Because this bank, this single institution, has been positioned as the unofficial command center of the 2024 swapline strategy. And guess what? You won't believe the name. The receipt is wilder than you think. But first, we need to understand how this mechanism actually works beneath the surface. To understand how global bankers can engineer a crisis without anyone noticing, we need to look at the machinery behind what some call the 2024 playbook. Let's start with a fundamental truth they don't teach you in school. Money isn't the real asset. Liquidity is. You can own gold, real estate, or even the world's strongest currency. But if you can't access instantly usable capital, you're powerless. This is why dollar swap lines are arguably the most dangerous financial weapon ever created. So, how do they work? Let's keep it simple. Imagine you're the European Central Bank. Panic is spreading through European markets. Banks are desperate for US dollars to fund their operations, and companies can't pay their dollar-denominated debts. The euro is on the brink of collapse. What do? You don't call your government, the UN, or the voters. You call the US Federal Reserve. And the Fed says, sure, in exchange for your euros, we'll give you dollars, unlimited dollars. At rates we decide, under terms we control. These agreements happen completely outside of public view. They bypass parliaments, elections, and any form of democratic accountability. They operate in the shadows, a hidden network of financial power. Now, let's flip the script. Imagine you're a smaller country, like Turkey or Argentina. Your currency is collapsing, and you desperately need dollars to stop the bleeding. You also call the Fed, but this time, the answer is a firm no. Only preferred nations, the compliant players in the global game, get access to this lifeline. Everyone else, they're left to drown in hyperinflation. This is the real secret to the dollar's dominance, long after it left the gold standard. It's not about trust or strength. It's about engineered dependency. Now, let's connect this back to this alleged 2024 playbook. The core idea is that liquidity is intentionally tightened, then loosened, then tightened again. This creates waves of financial stress, weakening certain institutions and making them perfect targets for a takeover. Let's look at a few numbers that paint the picture. First, total global debt is over $303 trillion. That's a record high, an amount that's impossible to pay back without constant liquidity injections from central banks. Second, there's an estimated $5.4 trillion shadow shortage of US dollars outside the United States. This is the gap that makes those swap lines so powerful a lever to control who survives and who fails. Third, despite all the talk about de-dollarization, 47% of global trade is still settled in US dollars. The world remains deeply dependent on it. Fourth, remember the global inflation peak of nearly 9% between 2022 and 2023. That was the most intense inflationary spike since the 1970s, and it put immense pressure on the entire system. And finally, US banks are sitting on over $2 trillion in commercial real estate exposure, a sector filled with potentially toxic assets just waiting to blow up. Now, put yourself in the shoes of someone with the power to control liquidity. If you could decide which banks survive the next crisis, who would you choose? You'd be strategic. You'd save the banks that align with your geopolitical goals, protect your influence, and reinforce your power. This is exactly what the 2024 document supposedly hints at. So which institution is named as the key coordinator in this leak? The name that comes up is JP Morgan Chase, the largest bank in the US and one of the biggest in the world. A bank that, during the 2019 repo crisis, received more emergency liquidity than any other. A bank that has a history of absorbing failing institutions like Bear Stearns and First Republic. Its CEO is a regular advisor to presidents, central bankers, and heads of state worldwide. JP Morgan isn't just a bank. It's a central node in the global financial network, a command center, an influence machine. The leaked document reportedly refers to it as the primary stabilization partner. What does that mean? It means when the next crisis hits, whether it's later this year or early next, JP Morgan is positioned to be first in line to deploy capital, buy up distressed assets for cheap, and lead the consolidation of the banking sector, all in direct partnership with central banks. This isn't just speculation, it's pattern recognition. In 2008, JP Morgan took over Bear Stearns. In 2023, it absorbed First Republic. In both cases, it came out stronger, more dominant, and more essential to the system. Now, imagine that same process happening on a global scale. That is the essence of the 2024 playbook. So, how would this crisis unfold mechanically? The document supposedly outlines what insiders call a controlled liquidity stress event. Here's the simplified sequence of events. Step 1 is a controlled tightening. Central banks might stop raising interest rates publicly, but behind the scenes, they quietly start restricting liquidity access for certain, less favored banks. Soon enough, these banks start showing signs of stress. Step 2 is market panic. Suddenly, bond yields spike, currencies start swinging wildly, and a mid-sized bank unexpectedly collapses, sending shockwaves through the system. Step 3 brings emergency meetings. Central bankers appear on TV, assuring the public they are monitoring the situation closely. But behind closed doors, the dollar swap lines are activated, and the real deals are being made. Step 4 is the selective rescue. Only the compliant, systemically important banks get full access to the emergency liquidity. The non-compliant or less strategic ones are left to fail. Step 5 is consolidation. This is where JP Morgan and a handful of other megabanks step in. They buy up the assets of the fallen banks for pennies on the dollar, further concentrating their power. Finally, Step 6 is the stabilization narrative. central banks declare victory over the crisis. The markets recover, and the public breathes a sigh of relief and moves on. But what really happened behind the curtain? Power became even more centralized. This isn't a rescue operation. It's a harvest. If you thought the financial chaos of the last 2 decades was intense, the next wave is designed to be faster, sharper, and more global. The tools are more powerful, the coordination is tighter, and the world's dependence on central bank liquidity is absolute. This playbook isn't about preventing a collapse. It's about managing and guiding a collapse to benefit from it. When the dust settles, the financial landscape will look very different. There will be fewer banks, but they'll be much bigger. Fewer independent currencies, but more centrally controlled ones. Fewer choices for consumers, but more surveillance tools for the powerful. Fewer safety nets, but more so-called emergency tools that give authorities unprecedented control. And where are you in all of this? You're expected to just watch from the sidelines, trust the experts, and believe the official story. But here's the unavoidable truth. Institutions that are built on borrowed time will eventually run out of time. And institutions built on borrowed credibility will eventually run out of excuses. The real question isn't whether another crisis is coming. It's about who will be in control when it does. And now that you've seen the playbook, you can't unsee it. So, I have to ask, have we learned anything from the past? Or are we just walking down the same road, but this time with people in better suits? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Share this video with someone who still believes the financial system is too complex to be manipulated. And make sure to subscribe if you want more deep, unfiltered breakdowns like this one. The next chapter of this story is coming faster than you think. And when it arrives, you'll want to understand what's happening before everyone else does. Thanks for watching.